Have you been convicted? Have you been convinced of something by the Spirit of God this weekend? And you go, I know that is a turning point in my journey with Jesus Christ. I hope so. Let's pray that that would be the case. Father in heaven, we pause right now to recognize you as our Creator and God, our lawgiver, Jesus Christ, as the friend of sinners, as our Redeemer, and our soon-coming King. We ask you to be present with us, that we might hear your voice, that we might know your plan and have the power to do it, given from on high. Please speak to each of our hearts this evening as you would speak. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, what do these guys have in common? No jokes, please, about Bill Gates. What do Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and the current CEO of Apple have in common? Yeah, they have a lot of money, but ding, ding, ding. We're in the Media Mind seminar. He's on my wavelength there. Steve Jobs was asked in an interview when the iPad was about to hit the store shelves, like, your kids must think this thing is the greatest toy ever, right? Nobody else had seen it yet or used it yet, but at least the Jobs kids for sure have had access to it. You know what he said? They've never touched one. The journalist couldn't believe what he was hearing. Bill Gates' kids, 45 minutes max per day of screen time, and that for edifying educational purposes. And the current CEO of Apple, he doesn't have children, but his nephew, who he cares about, I don't want him in social media at all. So that's a pretty strong stand. Are these like ultra-conservative, strict, religious fanatics or something? No, they just... Yeah, you get the theme as we go forward. It's not just them. It's the entertainers and the musicians and the screenwriters of the big movies. All of these guys on the screen admitted that their kids don't watch the movies or listen to the music that they are a part of producing. Video game industry, same thing. Adam Alter interviewed video game designers, and many of them opened up and admitted that actually we realize how addictive these games are, and we don't even play them ourselves, let alone our children. This is a CEO of a Silicon Valley firm called the Outcast Agency. She admitted in an interview that her little children, 0 screen time at all. For her older children, it's a max of 30 minutes per day. Then when you go not to just the CEOs and the big names, but you go to the mid-level people, the engineers and the employees at Facebook and Google and all the big tech firms in Silicon Valley. And you start to hear the same chorus echoing again and again. Oh yeah, with our 3-year-old, the nanny has to sign a contract that she will not be on her device and the children will not be using any screen time. You're going Play-Doh and Legos and going to the park and sandboxes and all the fun stuff with our kid. Then when they're school age, these young adults are seeking after the most popular, the most sought after private school in Silicon Valley, and it's called the Waldorf School of the Peninsula. I mentioned them just a little bit last night. And what makes them unique is screen-free education. Books, pens and paper, pencil and paper, chalk and chalkboards, gardening, some real physical things too. They got some weird stuff too, a little new age-ish, but they are spot on with this side of things. And that's the most sought after private school that these wealthy, up and coming tech gurus are able to put their kids into. So you're noticing a theme. We could call it the Silicon Valley disconnected childhood. You notice the name of this session is The Disconnected Childhood. This term could mean more than one thing. It could be a double entendre, a double meaning. A disconnected childhood could mean that they are disconnected from so much media. That would be a good thing to pursue with our children. We'll see in a minute what else that could mean, though. How about on the East Coast at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology? Here I am at MIT, says the famous researcher Sherry Turkle. And same story here, she says. Everybody's at a Montessori school and has rules about no computers at the dinner table, no computers at breakfast, no computers here, no computers there, no computers in the classroom. I mean, same story. So why is it that the people who know these things, know these devices, know these applications, and know these technologies the best are the ones that are the most protective of their own children from the impacts of these devices? New York Times put a whole expose out about this. The article was called a dark consensus about screens and kids begins to emerge in Silicon Valley. Quoting from the article, the people who are the closest to a thing are often the most wary of it. Technologists know how phones really work, and many have decided they don't want their children anywhere near them. My father-in-law used to work in a butcher shop. He knows how the sausage is made, and he said, I don't want to eat ground beef, I don't want to eat sausage, I don't want it anywhere near that stuff. Same thing here, because these guys get it. A wariness that has been slowly brewing is turning into a region-wide consensus. And here's the consensus. The benefits of screens as a learning tool are overblown. That's putting it mildly. And the risks for addiction and stunting development seem high. Now, I want to amend that very cautious statement that they made with a little more clarity. No hyperbole, no exaggeration, but based on the research, I would rephrase this as the benefits of screens as a learning tool are zero and perhaps negative versus the non-screen alternative. And the risks for addiction and stunting development are certain and established in the research. This is the reality of where we stand. But they were brave to put that out there. That's strong for mainstream media. That's pretty strong language for them. But one Silicon Valley mother who was interviewed in this adds more along the same line of everything we've been hearing. This mother said, well, you know, when it comes to my 5 and 3-year-olds, we do no screen time at all, except we will watch a program together as a family of some kind each week. Now, they're not coming at this from a religious perspective, so the program they watch might be a little different than what we watch. But you do notice that it's only once a week, and it's together. And we're watching something. Not everybody's on their own little devices and the kids being overstimulated with this stuff. So when we have this series of questions that I kind of jumped through this morning for the sake of time, I want to read each of them and think through what we are seeing about the Silicon Valley people and how they do it. What kinds of media, at what ages, on what types of devices, at what locations, for what purposes, at what times of the day, at what frequency of use, and for what duration of use. That bundle of questions is basically the series of questions each of us has to take into our own lives, and if we have children in the home, their lives, and answer these questions. And I'm not going to bring that prescription down from the mountain, as you've noticed. We got information, and we leave the Lord of all truth to give us our prescription. But as it comes here, what is the prescription these families are doing? At what ages? On what types of devices? None of them have their young children on mobile devices of any kind. Have you noticed that? The only screen time that's happening, we're watching something together as a family. So it's not at what locations? See that next one down that's in gray? It's not mobile. It's we're watching something together. Do you remember, was it last night or this morning? It was last night when we looked at sleep disruption and how video game playing, interactive screen time, is 4 times more potent to disrupt your sleep than watching a television or movie, a television program or movie. And that's not to endorse watching television programs or movies, cut and paste media on the brain right here. It's all about entertainment. But I do notice that in the research it's coming out that the higher stimulant effect is coming from the interactive screen time. From playing on the iPads and the phones, from getting on social media, playing those video games, it is a higher effect of, the word is stimulant. You remember when we were talking about addictions this morning? It said the media acts like a stimulant, like caffeine and cocaine and what was the other one? Caffeine, cocaine, and something else she said. I can't remember. You've got it. Yeah, amphetamines. There we go. Look back at these guys, though. It's funny that these guys would be the example of a positive model for anything, but you know what they did? This is just so basic human, what they did. We know what they didn't do, lots of screen time with their kids, but the journalist asked these guys, what do you do differently then? How do you do life in your home if it's not touch screen walls, which like we thought you had? That's what they wrote in the article. We figured the Jobs family had touch screen walls. Well, we have mealtime together. That's something we insist on in our home. They both said that when asked about this. It's kind of like this restaurant that said, we do not have Wi-Fi. Talk to each other. Pretend it's 1995. You know, talk to each other. How do you do that? What is that? Come on now. Penn State University did a study of dates, going on a romantic date. And they asked people, how frequently do you have the phone interrupting and disrupting your date with your significant other? And the majority of people said that it interrupts their dates every time they go. The majority of people. And then they wanted to see about relationship satisfaction in those marriages and relationships versus those who are not having it interrupted. And let me ask you a really tough question here. Do you think increased interference of the technology in the relationship correlates with increased relationship satisfaction or decreased relationship? That was not a hard question. Sometimes, don't you love it when researchers are like, look what we just discovered? When you're snubbing and ignoring somebody who you supposedly care about, it lowers the quality of the relationship. Thanks, guys. We appreciate that. University of Michigan study found tension increased in the home between parents and children because of the parents' use of the devices. We're going to talk a lot about the children's use of the devices. But they said mealtime was contaminated by the presence of devices. When they went into homes and looked at family dynamics sociologically, it's contaminating and causing tension. So God has the answer to this. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs didn't come up with the idea of mealtime together. God created the family. He instituted the family. In Eden, it's one of those beautiful and pure things that has no taint of sin. It was instituted in Eden. Deuteronomy 6 and Psalm 128 verse 3 actually allude to mealtime. Is anybody skeptical of that claim? Like, what? Mealtime? I can't think of any places in the Bible where it's like, have meals together. And it's just not, where is it? Where is it? Psalm 128 verse 3 says, the children will be like olive plants round about thy table. Your table. So the Bible mentions the table specifically there as where the children are growing like an olive plant. They're developing there at the table. So that's a reference to mealtime there. Another one which could be, partly, Deuteronomy 6. It's the one that says, parents, talk about God's commandments with your children as you rise up and lie down and walk by the way and sit in your house. Now, I know about rise up and lie down. That's morning and evening worship. Walk by the way is just kind of doing life together. That's a lost art. We're all going in different directions in this culture, in our families, and our people we love most. We don't do life together. But let's walk by the way together and talk of God's word as we do that. But then what was the fourth one I named? It's actually the first one in the text, but as you sit in your house. But didn't we already sit at morning and evening worship? The children will rise up like olive plants round about your tables. That sitting happens more than just that morning and evening worship, doesn't it? You know, the scriptures, the prophecies actually speak of the family. It's in a number of Bible prophecies, it talks about the family. And it's not just children will be disobedient to their parents and the love of many will wax cold, but there are specific things about the family being disconnected from one another, the disconnected childhood. You never thought media was going to fulfill this, but Jesus said in the last days it'll be 3 against 2 and 2 against 3, and a man's enemies will be the members of his own household. How sad of a reality that is in so many of our homes. Here's the good news. In Malachi, the very last verse, you know the verse, at the end of the Old Testament, it's talking about the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and Elijah the prophet will be sent, and the hearts of the children and the hearts of the fathers will be turned toward each other again. So I love this prophecy because there are a lot of apocalyptic last days prophecies where we're kind of spectators on it. You know what I mean? Like wars and rumors of war. I don't think anything I say or do is going to have much impact on the military-industrial complex. Like, you know what? Sorry, it's just going to happen. Satan's got the nations of this world angry, and by this we do know that Jesus is coming again. How about natural disasters? Not much I can do about that. Although they say if I drive an eco-efficient car, maybe I can reduce natural disasters. I'm a little skeptical on that one. I think that might be a World Economic Forum control mechanism, but take that for what it's worth. Most of those prophecies, I can't do anything about, but this one I can. I can make it, or at least I can do this side. I can control my, and then that invites and draws others into that connection again that Jesus said will be broken apart in the last days, but also in the last days, the hearts will be drawn toward each other again. Is that good news? Do you want to do that? That takes sacrifice. That takes effort to really make that connection so that our kids and our adult people that we love, we don't have it disconnected. We have connected. Well, they went into homes and wanted to see how these toddlers are doing, these preschool age kids are doing. How much interaction between parent and child is happening when the children are on their devices. They found the majority of parents have not a little less interaction than we ought to, but when their kids are on those devices, those parents didn't have like half of the time where they were interacting with the kids. The majority of parents didn't have barely any time that they were interacting with the kids. It was zero interaction at all for the majority of parents in those homes when those kids are on the devices, which, as we know from earlier, is hours a day. Children spend twice as long on smartphones as talking to parents. Do you remember the stat from last night that said parents are spending twice as much time just watching Netflix as quality time with their children all combined? And then you see it from the other angle. Twice as much time for the parents on Netflix, twice as much time for the kids on their smartphones. Are you seeing the reason for that mathematical equilibrium? Now half of families text each other in the same house. Experts say craze could have a catastrophic effect on family life. What's next? The media mind is alone, is disconnected. But the mind of Christ, what is God doing in our families? What is he doing in our lives? It's restoration, reconciliation, reconnection. We can be connected. That is his plan, and it is his power to accomplish it. God has the answer to all of that. Straight in Malachi 4, which I already mentioned. But people will say to me, oh, come on, Scott, you're too hard on the little kids with the devices. Can't the little kids learn from using mobile devices? Won't it help them in their development and their educational endeavors as 3-year-olds or whatever? Well, Dr. Dimitri Christakis is probably the foremost researcher on media and child development in early years. And what he came out with in this statement was, so what we do know about babies playing with iPads is they don't transfer what they learn from the iPad to the real world. So they've learned nothing. The example he uses is if you give these little toddlers and babies a block stacking app on an iPad, did you know there was such a thing? Like, can't they just play with blocks? I mean, why did you need to put it on a screen and make a block stacking app? Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? I know, but they've done this. So he took the block stacking app, gave it to one group of little ones, let them play with it and become experts at that little video game, and then took that away and gave them regular blocks and watched for their proficiency in block stacking. Meanwhile, there's a control group that was just given the blocks. They never got the iPad to practice at and become experts at block stacking with. Zero advantage at all to block stacking if you got the iPad first. Zero advantage at all. So he's saying they don't transfer it to the real world. Kind of like that baby last night who was playing with the iPad, and then they gave him the magazine, and they're like, wait, this doesn't work. So it actually confuses them. It actually inhibits their development. He also points out that when it comes to addiction symptoms to devices, we normally think as teenagers as being in that prime addiction window zone because there's a lot more freedoms and the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed and the frontal lobe isn't linked up with the rest of the brain and myelinated and properly functioning to have self-control. That's why we got to have that, that relationship and that connection to make sure that the rules are still being followed in those teen years. But he points out that these little kids are displaying more serious signs of media addiction than even the teenagers are. I found that to be very interesting. One of those would be tantrums. You've seen a toddler tantrum before, right? You probably did when you were a toddler. It happens. And then, oh, how am I going to handle this? Well, one of the things, you're not supposed to just they're enjoying some cherished toy and you just go and snatch it from them, right? That's not wise. That's not prudent. You want to be a little bit more tactful about that and talk about it and don't just abuse them in that way. They don't know how to handle that when they're 2. Well, if they're playing with a toy and you grab it from them, there's a certain number of tantrums that you get out of that in laboratory settings. But if you give them an iPad and they're playing with a device, and then you just come and grab that from them, the tantrums double. if it's a screen-based toy. Why is it that way? It's just, well, we heard this morning how addictive it is, how it's digital dopamine. Just repeating it again basically for the little kids. But also, it's not only do these devices bring no benefit, but they bring known harm. For example, studies have found that just 1 hour per day of screen time for these 2 to 5 year olds increases the risk for mental health disruptions across the board. Just 1 hour. That's like the recommended amount by the American Academy of Pediatrics. They say, well, no more than 1 hour, please. Boy, oh boy. You just show them 9 minutes of SpongeBob, and that's not even a video game. That's not even something exciting that they're manipulating and interacting with. This is just you're watching TV. It's exciting TV, don't get me wrong, but 9 minutes of SpongeBob reduces attention span in 4-year-olds after they view that, impairs their memory, reduces their ability to delay gratification, and increases aggressive behavior. By the way, all those things are just saying it disrupts frontal cortex function. That's all different manifestations of the same neurological inhibition. So when we get to that question on the list, we're maybe utilizing media as a tool at certain ages and stuff like that. But all of us, especially with these little ones, we want to ask, what is the purpose? Is the media there as a babysitter? Is it an entertainment? Or is it being used for some dedicated edifying purpose? SpongeBob, sheer entertainment, right? It's a bunch of nonsense. And so we want to ask, how about we like that mother who said, our kids don't do any interactive screen time, but we will once a week, as a family, watch a program. I'd like to modify that program with suggesting that the best developmental results are going to be found if that program is nature-paced. That's not me making that suggestion. Shall we quote again from The Desire of Ages? The more quiet and simple the life of the child, the more free from artificial excitement, and the more in harmony with nature, the better it is for their spiritual, mental development. That's non-theatrical, non-cartoon, not a new image on the screen every 2 seconds. I mean, that's not how nature around us works, right? It's just not that stimulating. It's just not that exciting. The problem with the entertainment media for children's development, really all of us actually, is that it's overstimulating. It's not nature-paced. The sudden noises, the dramatic scene changes from this to that, the rapid movement, even the color contrast. They talk about in research how dramatic, extreme color contrast and is part of the visual noise of cartoons, that when it's happening all at such fast paces and a new image on the screen and loud noises and all of this, not healthy for that developing brain. Now, I encounter this, or I bring up the advocate of the other side in my own mind, but hey, I watched TV as a kid and I turned out fine. Do you see any fallacies in that line of reasoning?
You're not looking off of the outside either.
Yep.
You don't know how you turned out if you didn't watch it.
Exactly. What's your control group here? She said, for those on the live stream, she said, you don't know how you would have turned out without it. You're just like, okay, fine. First of all, just fine. That kind of sounds like a low bar. Like, I want better than fine for my kids. What is fine? What's the measurement there? And where does that compare to the alternative of screen-free childhood? We have research on that you're going to turn out better in terms of your emotional control, in terms of your academic success, in terms of your character, and everything, basically. Every measure is going to be improved when you have more parental time, less media time. Also, TV 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50, pick your decades ago when you were a kid, it's not the same thing as TV today, is it? Today it's big screen, high definition, way more stimulant, because they have to increase the stimulant effect with each succeeding generation, with each passing year, it seems, in order to keep us engaged, or we get bored. So it's like a drug. You got to increase the dose, you got to keep it going at higher paces and increase frequency to keep people engaged with the screen, or you'll lose them. American Academy of Pediatrics put out this statement that I want you also to critique. We just critiqued that, but I want you to think critically about this. They said well-designed television programs such as Sesame Street can improve cognitive literacy and social outcomes for children 3 to 5 years of age. It's not necessarily what they're saying in the quote, it's what they're not saying. What are they not addressing here? Do you hear in the word improve, do you hear a relative term? So you're wondering, compared to what then? So this group of kids, aged 3 to 5, who've watched Sesame Street, have improved outcomes socially, literarily, cognitively. They have improved outcomes versus they didn't say. So that statement means nothing unless you know what the comparison group is. So as I was reading that, I thought, well, I bet you the comparison group is just kids who are watching all the other media, like the SpongeBob and stuff like that. And since Sesame Street is a little more subdued in its pacing and stimulant effect than the regular cartoons, it's probably going to lead to an improved effect. So you click on the footnote of the statement in the AAP article, boom, there it is. It was general population. Now, what if the control group was those who were doing no media at all? Kids who were being raised, basically screen-free, who are having a lot of good nature time and time doing things with their hands and being read to and a lot of interaction and eye contact and love and touch. Do you think this statement would hold true if that was the alternative group? Sesame Street improves outcomes for these children. Make sure to get your Sesame Street quota in this week or those children just aren't going to turn out right. They didn't do that study, but you can look at other research and conclude that you would rephrase it as this. Even well-designed television programs such as Sesame Street will, to a lesser degree than SpongeBob, decrease cognitive literacy and social outcomes for children 3 to 5 years of age when compared to media-free childhood. We'll move on from that. Another just kind of objection that comes up is, well, if we're keeping our kids from so much media at early ages and waiting, aren't they going to be technological misfits? Like they won't know how to use the devices, they won't know how to compete in a high-tech global market economy, and they're going to we're setting them back. Well, I want to introduce a couple of examples to you, like a dolphin that can use an iPad, true story, a chimpanzee that can play a video game, and this chimpanzee, which can actually not just hold a smartphone. By the way, what is the phone called? A what kind of phone? Smartphone. You're going to see why we call the phone smart, and the user, you're not that smart to be able to use it, because look at this. He even knows, like, do I double click it? Did you see how he was doing that? He's got some experience with this device. So if a chimpanzee can learn to use these devices, I'm pretty sure our kids can at the proper ages when they need to. Sugata Mitra was an Indian researcher who put computers into remote Indian villages and connected them to the internet, and he wanted to see how these low-tech kids are able to learn these technologies and how quickly. And boom, these kids with zero education all of a sudden start learning literacy, languages, infectious disease, and they're just like figuring out how to use these computers like that and learn a bunch. So it doesn't have to happen at age 5. You can wait and you can learn really quickly. Even the AAP has said, parents, don't fret about the issue of getting your kids involved with media from early ages for the reasons we're discussing right now, because they said the technology is so intuitive, is so user-friendly. In fact, I would say too user-friendly. It's how we become impulsive in our use of the platforms, that we don't have to even think about what we're doing, that we become controlled by it, as we were talking about this morning. So they were saying it's so intuitive and easy to learn, don't worry about it. Now, when we were on this slide, I wanted to go on to a little tangent on video games, because maybe some of you were thinking about, I know that if SpongeBob will increase aggressive behavior in children, I'm pretty sure violent video games are going to have an effect. But then there's a lot of propaganda that the video game industry has put out. They're like, oh, video games aren't going to increase violence, and, you can't prove that. And so they put all this, sophistry out there. Well, let's just look at the research. Do video games make children more prone to violence? Researchers conducted a thorough meta-analysis of 24 studies from locations around the world from 2010 to 2017, with more than 17,000 participants ages 9 to 19 years old. And here's what they found. Children who play violent video games show an increased tendency toward physical aggressive behavior. That would be antisocial behavior, not dad wrestling with his kids and good healthy stuff. But let me ask you a question. By a show of hands, how many of you are shocked by that finding? Me neither. By beholding, we become changed, right? We know about that. And then also the violence in the games, it is it is going to have an impact on the spectrum of self-control versus aggressive outbursts. And remember, we talk about spectrum thinking, not just like the worst case. Like over here is the mass shooter. And only a tiny fraction of the population will ever be mass shooters. And there are video gamers all along this spectrum. So you silly anti-video game people should not say video games are causing violence because there's only a handful of mass shooters and millions of video gamers. That's not the right way to think about it. Do you want to be moving this direction toward lack of self-control, or do you want to be moving this direction toward more self-control? Especially as Christians, especially as we are seeking for and hastening the coming of the Savior. We want to be moving in that direction of self-control, not of losing our temper. And what Victoria Dunkley's found, actually, and she reports this in Reset Your Child's Brain, is that all video games across the board are moving people this direction. The violence in the violent video games is actually only the icing on the cake in terms of the more pronounced effect of increasing violent behavior. So the gaming itself is just reducing prefrontal cortex, reducing impulse control, and you got a deficit there, and that leads to many things. It can lead to more prone to violence or other manifestations of a poorly functioning prefrontal cortex. The mind of Christ, self-controlled. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control. Don't you love this question that gets to appear on the screen all the time? As if we need to ask it. God has the answer to all this, right? Let's go back to nature. Green environments reduce aggressive acts. There's your answer to video games, is nature. Increase attention span and increase impulse control. So that's all the same way of saying help rebuild your brain and your frontal executive function. While I'm on the impulse control, though, I got to pick on the video game industry again, because I remember them putting out a whole bunch of propaganda years ago saying this generation of young people are going to be the best drivers on the road because they're engaged in quick reaction time type of playing and visual spatial reasoning in the video game interface, and that's going to translate to them being the best drivers the roads have ever seen. Well, we can now test that. Video gamers on average are more aggressive drivers with less self-control on the road than non-gamers. And that is not to say that every non-gamer is perfectly self-controlled and every gamer is on the far end of the spectrum. We're thinking directionally here. Wherever you otherwise would have landed on this spectrum because of genetics and child rearing and diet and other lifestyle factors, wherever you would have landed here, the video games are taking you one notch in that direction, the wrong direction. So video gamers on average are more impulsive, reckless drivers. The media mind, impulsive. The mind of Christ, more deliberate, right? More calculated, more self-controlled. So we see it in our kids and in the young people. We've been talking a lot about the young people here, but let's turn the attention right back, looking in the mirror as parents, many of us. Continuous partial attention, I'm speaking to myself really as a parent, was a phrase that totally convicted me when I first heard this. So I'm like, oh yeah, they have a name for it. And as soon as they have a name for it, you're like, yeah, I do that. With my kids, with my little ones in the home. Continuous partial attention. You see where they're going with that, right? My little baby girl, she's 5 now, but she was crawling on the ground one morning, and I was out and about, and my wife hadn't tidied things up yet, and I didn't even realize there were these little things on the baseboard of the kitchen, and I'm oblivious to that. I get on my phone. I'm like, okay, she's there. I'll say hello to her in a second. I look up. She's crawling toward a mousetrap. I immediately drop my phone. She was about to be like, oh, what is this new toy? I've never seen this before. That could have been bad, right? So I share that as a counterexample of what not to do. Total vulnerability here, where I'm among friends, aren't I? They actually have found that when parents are on their devices and the children are not allowed screen time, those children manifest some of the same symptoms, though to a lesser degree, but some of the same symptoms of children who are being raised with a lot of media, and they're not doing any media. They call it secondhand screen time. That's why there's a picture of somebody smoking, and the lady's like, I don't want your secondhand smoke. Secondhand screen time. The kids are getting messed up because they're not getting because we're distracted. Dogs might get depressed when owners overuse smartphones, study says. This one, the location of the device is something worth considering. In the home, when we're there as a family, consider this option. The old days of the phone and the hook. Do you remember when the phone was stationary and it was on the hook? If it ever got off the hook and made a terrible noise, and you'd have to remember to put the phone back on the hook. Well, we've got our phones all over the place, and it's bringing terrible noise into our life, but we don't even notice it. But then we look at that and we're like, yeah, maybe I need to put this thing on the hook. So let's go find a hook over here. Maybe just a charging station in the back closet or something. I don't know. But where it's out of sight, where you're not always picking it up, where it has a dedicated location for at least portions of the day, that it is, I'm going there to use it for a purpose, for a period of time, and then back to normal day. Now, some of you in the room might be like me and be like, I have a little bit of a problem with that, Brother Ritsema, because I really like to get photos of things that are going on. Oh, look at what the little one is doing. I got to get a photo of that. Not to make them, think of themselves. They don't even know I'm taking the picture, but I like to collect it. So you know what I've done? I don't always do the hook thing. I'll be honest. That's just an example. There are a lot of little tips you can look up. I don't like to just, go on and on with tips, but here's my tip for me. It's actually, I'm following it right now. See, I do like the photos. There's my wife and little daughter there. But my phone right now is in airplane mode, because I'm with you guys. And I'm not to be getting a phone call from my mother. I love my mother. I'll call her tomorrow. But right now, I'm with you guys, right? And so this is not to be, that would be weird if I just took a call or I was like, sorry, guys, just a second. And I started sending a text message. So it's in airplane mode. My favorite button on my phone is airplane mode, because I can carry it around then. First of all, I can put it on my person and there's not so much EMF happening for those who are concerned about that. And then I can have it available to take photos, but I'm also not like, oh, let me refresh my email while I'm, in between things with the kids. And then I'm on that for 10 minutes and they're like, when are you going to be done, Dad? That whole thing. I don't need to do that. Screens and spiritual development. They actually have found that research on transmitting the spiritual truths to the children from the parents happens, number one correlating factor that will increase the children's likelihood of walking in those spiritual truths as they go into adulthood, is that the spiritual truths are communicated in an atmosphere of relational warmth and connectedness. The hearts of the children and the hearts of the parents turning toward each other. It's the disconnected childhood that becomes the connected childhood. You know what I mean? Disconnected from so much media so we can really be connected. So then there's the emotional intelligence deficit of a generation. This hit me hard when I was speaking at a teachers' convention on media and child development. And I asked in a survey of the teachers, how many of you guys have seen in the last 5 or 10 years, this is about 5 years ago, so basically during the time window of the smartphones becoming big, how many of you have seen in the young people that are coming through your program today a decrease in X, Y, and Z since the time prior to that? And so I asked about academics, I asked about integrity, I asked about sociability, a lot of different things. Every single teacher said that every single metric of success we're looking for in our young people was going down in the last 5 or 10 years in this time window of which we are speaking. The one that they were the most enthusiastically concerned about was the social connection, the conversation skills, the eye contact. You might call this kind of the whole picture of emotional intelligence. They said this is the biggest alarm we are seeing, and they aren't the only ones. I talked to a daycare provider. This is just kind of anecdotal, but kind of fun, because she had been in the business for 50 years. And I said, well, tell me, what changes have you seen in 50 years? That's longer than I've been alive. I know that as history. And she said, well, there were big changes during the latchkey kid period of the 90s and mothers not being as present with their children. So the kids were in the programs longer and they were with their moms less. And we saw changes for the worse in kids during that period in the 90s. And then most recently, we've seen another phase that has been really harmful to children, and that's with all the devices. So she was saying that as like a 75-year-old woman here, been in the business for years. Then there's researchers like Dr. Catherine Steiner-Rader. You saw her book earlier called The Big Disconnect, and everybody's in their own rooms. She's interviewed preschool teachers for her research for that book. And she said the exact same thing. The children are not making as much eye contact. The conversation skills aren't there. And I'll tell you what, when you add to that, I think I already mentioned this, right? You add to that covering of faces and distancing socially and school going virtual and everybody's living on screens, it's only putting fuel to that fire of a mental health and emotional health crisis, an EQ crisis. But of course, the devil has the answer to the problem for us: social robots. You couldn't make this stuff up, could you? Social robots? Well, yeah, they said since kids are growing up with a lack of empathy, a lack of love, a lack of social connection, a lack of skills of that nature, and since all the humans in their lives, I guess, are too busy for them, we'll bring in robots to teach children how to love. Let that statement sink in again. What a counterfeit. Can a robot love? I don't often cite popular culture, and particularly Hollywood, but there was this movie when I was a kid called The Wizard of Oz, and there was this figure in there who was a robot, and there was also a figure that was a straw man, and the straw man didn't have a brain because he's just a straw man. The robot didn't have a what? Do you remember? You know of it. Okay. A heart. So that's kind of like the archetype of what a robot is not. It might be intelligent. It might be efficient. It might be amazing in so many ways, but it will never have a heart. And it's the thing they're saying, social robots? Boy, is that an oxymoron. That's about as about as true of a compound noun as social media. Anti-social media. We should call this the counterfeit. God has the real answer. They took children in Los Angeles out to the mountains, out to the country for 5 days. These are fifth graders who are going out on a nature excursion. You're going to go out to the camp and do archery and hiking and team building exercises and all this fun stuff. You're going to be kids outdoors. Kids are getting excited about this, and then they tell them with no screen time, no media. You can imagine the groans at that point, but they're the ones that get to go have the fun. Half the fifth graders go out there for the experiment. The other half have to stay in the city and stay in their desks in school and stay playing their video games and their addictions. So I felt bad for those kids. What they found in this study was after just 5 days, you give them an emotional intelligence quiz, a series of questions, a questionnaire that gauges their abilities at emotional intelligence before the 5 days and after the 5 days. And you do it with both groups. In just 5 days of no media, lots of people and lots of nature, you found their emotional intelligence jumping in 5 days. So we might lament a generation like these teachers and this daycare provider did. You might say all is lost. I mean, yeah, I don't want to understate the nature of the problem, but I also don't want to understate the hope of the solution. It is so clear and so beautiful and so of God. Now, I mentioned Jean Twenge in previous presentations, who wrote the book iGen. She says there were dramatic changes in the lifestyle and the emotional health and on every barometer of what young people do and how they do it. And she was just studying teenagers. She said dramatic changes happened about 2011, 2012. What was that? Social media becoming ubiquitously used by the young people. She says this generation that is coming up through that, and I think the young people right now are defying this in large numbers. But a lot of them are also just getting sucked into it just like their older peers and counterparts. But she says today's young people are totally unprepared for adulthood. 18-year-olds now act like 15-year-olds used to. And 13-year-olds like 10-year-olds used to. And she's not name-calling. She's not just trying to be rude. She's speaking factually. She's going on data here. The things that 18-year-olds are doing today, they used to start doing at 15, and etc. with the 13 and the 10-year-olds. So in other words, it's a state of arrested development. The media mind is in a state of arrested or slowed or retarded development. The mind of Christ is maturing properly. That's the laws of development that Jesus developed according to. If you read that in the Desire of Ages, it says he developed according to the laws of childhood, the laws of development that God has established. And our kids can too, but if we have them behind screens all the time and not interacting with people and not taking on responsibilities, not doing things with their hands. I loved hearing the reports of the kids just digging into the ground out there. They're like, oh, this is good soil at the top here. Like they know what good soil is and how much topsoil is. You know, you would expect in North Carolina how this is abnormally more. And then they're going really hard into the hard stuff you guys have down here. Is it clay or is it stone or what, or both? Yeah, we got sandy soil. I got the dream soil where I live. I don't mean to make you guys. You'll come out of this stronger because God cursed the ground for man's sake. So there you have it. You have to work harder than me. You'll develop a better character more quickly because I got ease up in Michigan. Children not toilet trained when they start school. UK Telegraph put out this report where they interviewed teachers of kids who are starting school. These are school-aged kids. And the problem is we should have a mass distribution of the iPotty. If they all would have had the same privilege, underprivileged children lacking the iPotty, that's why they didn't learn. 2/3 of teachers surveyed in this survey said they are worried about the children's self-help skills, about how 5-year-olds know how to swipe a phone but don't have a clue about conversations. It was a really big alarm that came out. Children learn to tie shoelaces later than ever before. Just all the practical skills are being arrested and delayed. This isn't the most important thing. Like make sure you gotta have your shoelaces tied by 7, or you're gonna fail in life. Now I don't mean to make that the thing. It's just one interesting anecdote. Kids use tech so much they can't hold a pencil anymore, doctors say. And it's interesting how they're using the examples of pencils and shoelaces, because actually at 5 and 6 and 7, the fine motor skills are tough. Writing and these kind of things, we're told wait till age 8 or 10 to get involved with serious academic schoolwork. And there's a reason for that, for brain development or fine motor skills that are coming on a little bit later. But what really surprised me was not that they were struggling with the fine motor skills like tying shoelaces and writing, but that gross motor skills, running, jumping, playing, twisting, throwing, all the things kids do, naturally when you put them outdoors, it's like sending the dog out and he just starts running around, right? It's like kids just run around. They found that their core muscles are weaker, that they have worse gross motor skills, and that playground injuries have increased. Now that puzzled me when I heard that, because I had the thought, I played on the playgrounds like that in the 80s. Do you remember those? Do you have any of these relics around that are actually fun? I push my kids on today's merry-go-rounds, and I'm putting my all into that, and I'm, high energy. I'm not, like, slacking off here, and the things like, I said, this has a governor. I can't get you guys going on this thing. They put a governor on this. And the slide is about that tall, right? With the sides and everything at the playgrounds today is super, super, super safe, right? So why are playground injuries increasing? They don't know how to play. We had less injuries when we were playing on dangerous playground equipment with our feet swinging around behind our back, and if a kid gets his head in there and it bangs, you could have some injuries on those playgrounds. I remember 1 or 2. But there are more playground injuries now with super safe playgrounds. That's strange. We don't know how to play. Medical students raised on screens lack skills for surgery. Oh, this was another video game PR piece. They said today's generation of young people are going to be the best surgeons and pilots because of that same kind of thing we were talking about with the video games. And the video games are really going to give you skills for that, right? Well, Dr. Roger Kneebone, who I think was destined to be a surgical professor, but he says, Professor, I don't know if that's a pseudonym or his actual name, but he says a decline in hands-on creative subjects at school and practical hobbies at home means that students often do not have a basic understanding of the physical world. That's a strong statement from a serious academic who's like, we can't find qualified, quality surgical students for our medical programs. Does it take just a little bit of self-regulation, self-control, focus to be able to study and hit the books hard enough to go through a medical degree? That requires some self-discipline, focus, and impulse control. What happens when you're playing all these video games? You're reducing impulse control, as we saw earlier, so they just can't get these candidates. I spoke with an auto mechanics teacher who worked at a public school in the auto mechanics class, and I asked him, how's it going compared to 20 years ago, 30 years ago? He said it's night and day. He said 30 years ago, I would have the majority of my students, by the end of one semester, competent at some basic auto mechanics skills. Today, I'm maybe doing 12% competency. Any math students want to do what kind of decreased drop that is, right? That's almost an 80% drop in competency. From 50% down to 12%, from 50% down to 10% would be an 80% drop, right? Relative risk? Or, yeah, Chad's thing the other day about absolute or relative. Well, I'll leave that aside. The fact of the matter is they're struggling. Video games, says Maggie Jackson, author of Distracted, teach the kinds of skills useful for what? Fill in the blank. Video games teach some kind of skills, right? They have to have some function. They teach the kinds of skills useful for playing more video games, and not much more. And that's the fact of the matter. Speaking of arrested development and lack of practical skills, when these young men check in to the video game rehab outside of Seattle called the Restart Program, where pornography addicts, video game addicts, etc., these young men check into the rehab because they are totally addicted and they know it and they need to go get help. We're not talking about addiction. We talked about that this morning. But what we're seeing here at the Restart Program, the founder of this program said you would be shocked by how many of these 25-year-old men, 30-year-old men, 20-year-old men don't know how to cook breakfast, don't know how to clean a bathroom. So what are they? First of all, we got to have a chat with mom. I know you love your kid, but enabling is not love. Indulgence is cruelty. Even with a little child, not to mention a grown man. Addiction takes hold and you end up a lazy bum. In the demise of guys, in Media on the Brain, we had a session called The Demise of Guys. And they found, actually in 2016, after we did Media on the Brain, it was the lowest unemployment that we'd seen in a long time by 2016. And I saw a data point from the Bureau of Economic Statistics, and it said, Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, and they said a quarter of young adult men were not working. Like, wait a minute, aren't young adult men the hardest working people on planet Earth? I mean, women are harder workers as mothers. I stand corrected. But in the workforce, as far as getting out there, nose to the grindstone, punching in, I'm a young adult male. I'm 18 years old, and I'm working 80 hours a week when I was 18. I'm not saying that to brag. I think that's not that big a deal because I just work and go to sleep and then, work and go to sleep, and I just didn't have a life for 5 days of the week, and then I had a weekend. I worked 4 consecutive 80-hour weeks. That's something that young adult men can pull off. A quarter of them are not working at all in the best context for employment that you've seen. The media mind is just lacking practical skills. The mind of Christ is well-rounded. Let's go back to Jean Twenge. She says the percentage of teens that have a job has been cut in half. The average teen now gets less exercise than the average 60-year-old. They're studying less. They do less volunteer work. They do fewer extracurricular activities. So are you noticing everything in life that human beings do, they're doing less of? Except, And they're getting their driver's licenses later than ever before. That one maybe is a silver lining because, as Chad was telling you before, when we had our driver's licenses and we were a rebellious youth, we got ourselves into a bunch of trouble having driver's licenses early on and being on our own. We should be as families. We should be connected. Should have been with our fathers. But nonetheless, this is not a happy picture. Even if there's maybe a silver lining, the fact that they're not getting driver's licenses is actually just a result of the arrested development. Any young people in here that are under 16, is this being live streamed? They might feel like they're going to get in trouble with the law, but do you get behind the wheel on your acreage, on your property, and drive around a pickup truck or something like that? Does anybody do that? Okay, well, I won't tell you what my kids do then because I'm not in as safe of a group as I thought. Maybe you just don't have the right age group, but my little guys are driving tractors and stuff and figuring this stuff out, and so it's a useful, functional thing. I'm not talking about sending them off and go and do whatever you want, but you're seeing the picture of a childhood that is being, it's like extended adolescence. Oh, I forgot about this. I haven't talked about this in a long time. This isn't schooled. Have you ever seen Schooled, the deliberate agenda to destroy individuality, reduce intelligence, and re-engineer society? It was a seminar from a few years ago that we did. And in this, studying the history of that, I encountered the fact that I realized that I've never heard of adolescence and teenagehood as a category prior to about 100 years ago. And so I looked into that. I'm like, when did that come about and why? And it was a part of the scheme of the early 20th century progressive era movement and the development of the worldly education system to extend childhood. Instead of at age 12, you're starting to take on adult responsibilities. You're thinking entrepreneurially. You're thinking about your future, taking life more seriously. And we've always struggled in those years, you know, figuring yourself out. You're not fully all developed. So you got your parents there, but you're stepping out of childhood into that youth period into adulthood. Okay, this is the real issue is groupthink. What you're seeing on the screen really happened. This is not a made-up thing. But somebody said something earlier from the front. Chad, what did you say about being on social media and thinking as a mass, thinking as a group? That's what's going on. In Revelation 13, it says the whole world wonders after the beast. How much of the world wonders after the beast? The whole world. So it's like there's this groupthink going on. You don't realize it, but you are being programmed. Do you remember that line from earlier? That's how you get a whole generation of young people going, I'm going to take the Tide Pod Challenge. Yeah, let's eat laundry detergent. I did it. I'm famous on YouTube now. Wait, you just ate laundry detergent? Do you need your head examined? What is going on? Well, it's what everybody's doing. It's the Tide Pod Challenge. Didn't you hear about it? That actually happened in 2017. This was kind of a funny one. This guy was like, I know how gullible and dumb people are these days. I'm going to tell them to take I wouldn't do this. This isn't nice. It's a prank he pulled on people. I'm going to tell people to take a tinfoil ball, put it in the microwave, and it'll turn into this beautiful silver ball. Just do it and try it. You'll love it. People actually did it. And then they posted on his feed, hey, mine was just sparking and flaming. Like, it wasn't working right. Are you sure this works? He goes, are you sure you did it for the full 3 minutes? And they're like, no, I stopped. He's like, try again. They're like, okay, I'll go try again. After you've just observed, I mean, cause to effect reasoning is totally disconnected in this generation. It's a scary thing. People not capable of thinking critically and using observation with their own two senses. I think that having gone through the COVID crisis and the deceptions therein and all of the moments where we were like, what? Seriously? They're getting away with that and people are on board and enthusiastically pushing that thing after thing after thing that made no sense? You're going, yeah, that's a generation that really is struggling to think critically and independently. Now let's look at the parents again. We were pretty hard on the teens, but listen, teens, this isn't going after the teens. If anything is a problem with a generation of teens, it's really the parents' fault anyway, right? But parental use of media. Catherine Steiner Adair conducted focus group studies and interviewed children about their parents' use of media. And I'm going to quote for you and read for you from my notes several children's statements about how they feel about their parents' use of media. Colin, age 12, says this. There are definitely some parts that make it seem like they're really addicted to their phones. And I feel like my dad is with his computer, definitely. I mean, if he's like awake at 1, he'll check on the dog and then he'll look at his computer and be on it till like 5 and think it was like 5 minutes. And then the next day, he's really tired. Angela, age 13, says, what I wish my parents understood is that technology isn't the whole world. It's annoying because it's like, you also have a family. How about we just spend some time together? This is the kids saying this to the parents. And they're like, wait, I just need to check my phone and check something and see what's going on at work. Carlos, age 13. When they're on the computer or something, it's always like they're entranced by it. They are addicted to it. And they just do it all the time. Tyler, age 7, says, my mom is almost always on the iPad at dinner. She's always just checking. I thought that was a really profound thing for a 7-year-old to say. I don't know if he meant to be so clever. She's always just checking. You're not just checking then, are you? Penny, age 7. I always keep on asking my mommy, let's play. And she's always texting on her phone. If this doesn't make our hearts break just a little bit, I don't know what would. Owen, age 9. Once, my dad was ignoring my mom so bad for like 30 minutes, so I sat on his keyboard. I got sent to my room. I was just trying to help my mother. I got in trouble, though. Ava, age 11. I'm sorry, Ava is age 7. A lot of time at home. A lot of time at home, when my parents are home and on their computers, I feel like I'm not there. Because they pretend like I'm not there. They're not even talking to me. They're just ignoring me. I feel like, sad. And you wonder why suicide rates are skyrocketing. I feel like I'm not there. What does my existence matter? This one is Annabelle, age 7. My parents are always on their computers and on their cell phones. It's very, very frustrating, and I get lonely inside. When my dad is on the phone, I have this conversation in my head. Hello, remember me? Remember who I am? I am your daughter. You had me because you wanted me. Only it doesn't feel like that right now. Right now, it feels like all you care about is your phone. But I don't say that because they'll get mad at me. It doesn't help. It feels worse. So it's just the conversation I have with myself. You don't need any commentary to add to that heart cry of that child who has that conversation in her head and her parents don't even know. We've been given such beautiful counsel in the spirit of prophecy about child rearing. One of my favorite quotes is to make children's lives as happy as possible. And that doesn't mean by being an indulgent parent. There's much to be said about order, discipline, authority, but these children are miserable. And we're counseled to make their lives as happy as possible. How do you do that? With your presence. You do that by doing this. You do that by not having the disconnected childhood. They're disconnected from media, it'll be a reconnected childhood. Speaking of the children, Neil Postman, famous author of Amusing Ourselves to Death, he wrote another book called The Disappearance of Childhood. This book was published about 40 years ago, and it sounded like a little bit of exaggeration. Like, oh, come on, you're an alarmist. The disappearance of childhood? Really? Fast forward 40 years. You look at how children spend their time, and it's about 1/3 school, 1/3 media, 1/3 sleep, with very little marginal times left for anything else that used to monopolize and fill childhood. From play, to books, to music, to paper routes, to sandboxes, to forts, to everything, grandma and grandpa, to service, to all the good things. They're just being subsumed and overwritten by a virtual prison. Why would I call it a virtual prison? Because 3/4 of UK children actually spend less time in nature than prison inmates spend outdoors. You get more nature exposure as a prison inmate than as a child in the UK for 3/4 of the children. This is criminal in the sight of heaven, huh? They're in the prison, but we're the criminals. The Last Child in the Woods is a great book by Richard Louv. It sounds like a really depressing book, The Last Child in the Woods, but it's a very hopeful book. It talks about the benefits of nature and all of that. But one very sad thing he brings out in that book is another study that was done that asked 11-year-olds, how many of you have ever climbed a tree before? Now, doesn't that sound like the kind of a question that the children's story speaker at church asks in order to get every kid's hand in the air? Like, now kids, how many of you have ever seen a dog before? And everybody's like, yeah, I've seen a dog. Now you got them listening, right? How many of you have ever climbed a tree before? The majority of children, age 11, have never climbed a tree. This is not human. This is not normal. This is not okay. The average child ages 6 to 16 spends twice as much time just playing video games than all outdoor activities combined. This is why Cardaris is raising the alarm with strong language. He says kids raised with screens were almost universally what I like to call uninterested and uninteresting. Sorry. Bored and boring. They lacked a natural curiosity and a sense of wonder and imagination that non-screen kids seem to have. And we don't even need to lose that as older people. Creativity, curiosity, wonder, amazement at God's creation. That's not just for kids. But these screen-based kids don't have it. They didn't know or care to know what was happening around them in the world. All that seemed to drive them was a perpetual need to be stimulated and entertained by their digital devices. The media mind is bored and boring. By the way, before I continue, this is going to be our last media mind and the mind of Christ. There's going to be 3 of them back to back, and then we're going to close with prayer. But I got to say one quick thing about boredom, because I forgot that I did not include those slides, and I told you this morning we were going to talk about boredom later. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about boredom, and I'll make sure to have you guys out by 10 o'clock tonight. Why are you laughing? You've probably heard me make that same joke before, haven't you? Sorry. Thanks for indulging me. Boredom. You go back in the English language prior to the Industrial Revolution, you cannot find the word, you cannot find the concept. Human beings in an agrarian society just weren't bored. There was no such thing. Isn't that amazing? You get to the Industrial Revolution, you get urbanization, you get excitement, you get fast pace, you're moving this way and that, you got amusements coming in. Oh, did you see the latest thing? And then entertainment culture sets in, and then media, and then more media, and then more media, and that 150 years of the development of urbanization, all to the crazy media culture we have today, has only increased boredom decade over decade. Why are we so bored? Is it because we have nothing to do, or is it because we have too much overstimulating stuff to do? It's like the how to escape the pleasure trap thing that I was telling you about. High, crash, high, crash, high, crash, high. And then you're in the doldrums. We're so bored, actually. They did a study. I don't have the stats. It's in my notes. I forgot the exact numbers. But I think it was a good, 50% of men. And it was like a quarter of women. It might have been 2/3 of men. I always understate it if I don't know it in my mind. But a sizable number of people. When you put them in a room by themselves, white walls, nothing to do. Sit in that chair. Maybe you'd do some Bible memorization. Maybe you'd sing. Maybe you'd make some plans in your mind about what you want to do later this year. I don't know. But we get so bored when we don't have something to immediately stimulate that they did this to test and see how bored people are. They said, by the way, on the shelf over here, it's the only thing in the room, on the shelf over here is a little electronic stimulus thing that gives shocks. So if you were to put your finger in this little finger holder and press that button, you'd be shocked with electric voltage. Okay, see you later. Sit in here. And they leave the people to sit in there. And the person's like, well, that's strange. They just told me about that. The majority of men got so bored that they walked over and shocked themselves. And a quarter of women also. So boredom does not need to exist. We are bored. The more media you consume, the more bored you are. Kaiser Family Foundation research study. The more media you consume, the more bored you are. And I used to go to the media to cure my boredom. Like, I'm bored. Is the game on? I want to watch the game. I'll stop being bored because I can watch something fun. I'm bored. Let me play a video game. I'm bored. Let me go to the feed and see if there's something that can just kind of boop, give me a little dopamine hit, as Sean Parker said they're trying to do on social media. I'm bored. I want some entertainment to unboardify me. Can we say unboardify? The entertainment is not unboardifying you. It's kind of like how caffeine doesn't actually give you energy, but people who are on caffeine have low energy, and then they got to drink the caffeine to get the energy. The caffeine is the cause of the low energy, not the solution. Okay. Closing here. Do you want to have wonder and imagination, a sense of the beauty and the majesty of God's creation? Do you want to delight in His Word? Do you want to enjoy a camp meeting like this? Connect with people? Do you want to really be a human? How to be human again. The media mind is bored and boring, but the mind of Christ is curious and inquisitive. It hungers and thirsts for knowledge. The media mind is immersed in the counterfeit reality. But the mind of Christ is awake to the wonders of God's reality. The media mind is enclosed in that virtual prison, but the mind of Christ is fully alive. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for bringing us life to the full through Jesus Christ, the abundant life. We want to know you, for that is life eternal. As we go on to the remainder of our evening and the remaining moments of this Sabbath day, we pray that we would walk with you as Enoch did. Maybe it's a slow pace. Maybe we're resetting our mental taste buds. But we want to pray to you. We want to study your word. We want to memorize your word. We want to hear your voice. So cure our mental ailments that we've brought on ourselves, maybe even unknowingly sliding and slipping into excessive media use. But we know your plan now, and we commit to it. Give us eye salve so that we can see more clearly. A new set of lenses, a trial to attempt to taste and see that not only are you good, but at your right hand are pleasures evermore. We trust that you satisfy the desire of every living thing, and that you withhold from us no good thing, for we want to live upright and follow you on the narrow path for when Jesus comes again. In his name we pray. Amen.